Hi, today we're going to show you how to install a MyTrickRC car lighting kit into a car body. This happens to be an HPI Camaro body that came with a car that we recently purchased. And the result is going to be something very similar to this FRS chassis. And the kit comes with two 5mm white headlights, two 5mm red tail/brake lights, and then 4 corner amber turn signals. And the brake light functionality looks like this. And then the turn signals, see, right turn, left turn, and in the front. The difference between these two bodies is that this body came with light canisters, so when we were painting it, we specifically took note to paint these ones silver, and then we mounted the LEDs into the canisters before we glued it all in place. We'll show you how to do this type of installation, but our main focus is going to be installing the lighting kit into a standard type body such as this one, where we're going to mount the LEDs directly to the body, not through any light canisters. But when we're done, you'll know how to install it into either system. Now, to do this installation, you're going to need a few tools. The first tool you're going to need is a drill, a hand drill like the one shown here. This will be for drilling the holes for mounting the LEDs. You're also going to need a couple Allen wrenches. This will be for removing the cover of your radio. The way that we get our power and get our signal is we have a Y-splitter cable that taps power and signal directly off of your motor cable and your steering cable. You're also going to want a pair of small cutters, or you can use scissors for cutting the zip ties towards the end of the installation after we were cleaning it all up. And then one of the last steps is using Zap Glue to either glue the canisters into place, or in any case you'll want to put a little bit on the LEDs to reinforce them. That'll give the LEDs a little bit more rugged durability long term. The flexing of LED cables is what typically would damage them over time. Okay, with that, let's get started. Let's take just a moment to review the contents of the MyTrickRC turn signal car lighting package. The heart of the system is this small controller. This is the UF7 controller, and we will show you how to connect the LEDs to this and what mode to set it to in order to get the brake light and turn signal functionality. The kit includes two 5mm white LEDs, two 5mm red tail brake light LEDs, and 4 3mm amber LEDs. You can identify which LEDs are which color by the color of their wires. We also include two Y-splitter power cables, and this is for tapping power off of the radio to the system while also allowing you to connect power to your motor and to your steering servo. We'll explain that more in a little bit. We also include a 9-volt battery cable. We won't use this. In order to get the brake light and tail light turn signal functionality, you can't use the 9-volt adapter. You must tap the power off of your radio directly. But we figure that in the future, when this body is damaged and you have some other vehicle, you may want to use this, the UF7 controller, in one of your other vehicles. So, and in those cases, you may want the 9-volt battery to power the system if the lights are unsteady or whatever, whatever the option may be. You can read about that in the manual later. We also include all of the mounting hardware, the bezels for connecting the LEDs to the body, zip ties and things for cleaning up the installation when it's all done, and of course the manual. One other item to note before we begin our installation. The car lighting package includes 4 amber turn signals and 2 tail brake lights. That's excellent for the FRS. It has 2 red tail brake lights and 2 amber turn signals. But in the case of the Camaro, you'll note that all the tail lights are red. One of the things that MyTrickRC likes to do is give our customers flexibility. So when we bought this package, we ordered 2 extra red 5mm LEDs, and so that's going to give us a total of 4 5mm red lights. We're going to then replace the 2 rear turn signals with red LEDs. We'll put the 2 middle LEDs as the brake and tail lights, and the 2 corner ones as the turn signals. As we mentioned, the FRS body kit came with light canisters for the headlights and the tail lights. Not all unpainted bodies at the hobby store have the light canisters, so if you want to have the look where the LEDs sit inside the lens, then you want to make sure that the kit that you buy of whatever body style includes the canisters. So the next step for this car is to start cutting out these canisters. You'll notice we painted them silver, and we're going to cut these out and insert the LEDs and then glue them in place. Again, when I cut these, I start out with them a little bit rough, and then I come back in and clean up the detail. It's a little bit easier to handle the part when you do it this way. Okay, this looks pretty good to me. And now we'll go ahead and drill the holes for the headlights and the front turn signals. When you start to drill the light canisters, there's 2 very important items to note. The first one is you want to make sure you don't over drill the hole if you can help it. And the way to do this is to start out small, test it, make it a little bit bigger, test it, until the bezel snaps right in. We'll show you that a little bit more as we get there. The other very important item to note is sometimes when they mold these parts, the material gets very thin and it can be very fragile. If you put too much pressure on it, it'll punch right through. If that does happen to you, don't panic. The solution is to clean it up with your scissors as best you can to try and make the hole about the right size and round, and glue it in with the zap goo or the shoe goo. So let's go ahead and start punching the hole for this guy. And the drill size is approximately 1/4 inch. We'll post on the video here in a second exactly what size we recommend it to be if you want to be that particular and measure it. The other way is to just take it, get it pretty close, snap the LED bezel in there, see how it feels. Okay, that one went in pretty good. Now the key here is if the LED snaps in really gently, then it's the right diameter, so this one is good. Alright, let's do the next hole. Now this is going to be smaller. This is going to be for the 3mm amber turn signal. Okay, now what just happened was I put a little bit of pressure and it went right through. So my hole, if you see right here, is kind of broken through. It's not a nice clean hole. I'll very gently try and get it as close as I can with the drill, and if I end up needing to, I'll come back with the scissors. I like the LEDs to try and point as straightforward as I possibly can get them, so I kind of make a note of when I'm drilling this to try and massage the hole to be as close to a place where it's going to point about straight out as I feel like I can get it to. And sometimes it's easier to do these from behind, actually, as long as you get your perspective right, how you see it. Okay, this looks like about the straight position. If I was looking at it here, I'd want it about like this. It's pretty straight out. Okay, it's not a great hole, but let's just take a little bit off here with our scissors. That looks pretty reasonable to me. Let's take one of the smaller 3mm bezels and see if we can snap it in. It's a little bit tight. I think we might want to make that hole a little bit bigger. Let's try putting an LED into it. And that actually snapped in pretty well. So we will come back and reinforce these LEDs with some zap goo in any case, but this bezel or this light canister looks pretty good. Let's do the other one. The next step for this body is actually to cut the body out of the material that it was molded from. But for the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and skip over that and show you how to install the light canisters. The first thing that you want to do is you want to place the light canister into the position where you know it's going to belong, whether this is a headlight canister or a taillight canister. Once you have a good idea of where it's going to live once it's glued down, lift up the light and apply a decent, generous amount of glue. Try to make sure it's not going to, once you squeeze it, go into the area where the lighting is, because you'll actually be able to see through that. Keep it around the outer edge, but put a nice sized bead around there. Okay, remembering where you picked it up from, place it right back down into the same spot. Now if you need to, have a little bit of tape ready so you can put it down here just to help secure it. Once it's cured overnight, you can come back the next day and apply even a larger bead around here to make sure that the light canister is securely installed. And also you'll want to come back and apply it to the LEDs themselves to give some strain relief to the wires. Once you're done, the final result will look something like this. Now on this one I would actually come back and add another bead of zap goo or shoe goo to make sure that they're really securely held in place. And also, I did put a little bit on the LEDs already, but really they should have a little bit more than this to give it a good, strong support. Now that we've shown you how to put light canisters into a body of this type, let's set this aside and move on to the Camaro body, which may be even a little bit more common out there. The first thing to do is look and see where it is that you want to put the LEDs. This one is pretty obvious. We want to put the headlights right in the middle of the headlight area and the turn signal in the turn. And same thing with the brake lights, just put the LEDs right in the middle of each of these holes. Go ahead and get started by drilling them out. I would suggest actually starting your drilling from the outside in. Let me flip it over so you can see it a little bit better. We'll go right down the middle of this light and press gently but firmly. Check it. Okay, this is definitely too small. It needs to be bigger. If when you're drilling, sometimes what happens is it's like your drill bit sort of wanders one way or another. If that happens, you can apply a force, kind of in the little extra force in the direction that you want it to move, and you can adjust the whole position as you're drilling it if you do that. Okay, this is a little bit closer. Let's have a look here. It went in. It's pretty tight. I think it's going to end up having to be a little bit larger than this. The LED is going to be difficult to snap in there, and we don't want that. Okay, we've cleaned up our hole. We cleaned it up from the inside, so now there's no more burrs on it. Let's snap our bezel in and see how well it fits. Alright, it went in pretty good. Let's see how the LED snaps in there. Okay, that's perfect. That's exactly how we want it. Let's go ahead and move on to the other headlight and then the two turn signals. Okay, so when I drilled this hole, it didn't end up in the position where I wanted it. I wanted it to be a little bit up that way. So I'm going to continue drilling very gently, and while I do it, I'm going to apply a pressure in that direction to kind of move the hole up. And there, you can see now I've repositioned it to a little bit closer to where I want it. Do that a little bit more. Check the hole for size. It looks a little bit small. I'm going to come back and clean up the burrs from the inside. You can see those burrs in there. We really don't want those. The bezel will not hold in well if you have burrs like this. You need a clean hole. Now that all of our lights are installed, the next step is to install our UF7 controller. Probably the best place to put the controller is on the roof, but we'll want to shift it to one side, and the reason for this, we'll shift it to the passenger side, The reason is because if we look at our car, the radio for the car is towards the passenger side, and we want the maximum service loop between these two. And what I mean by that is there's a power cable that's going to come off of our controller and it's going to plug into our radio. That cable is only so long. We want to have the most length that we can get so it's easy to take our body off so we can service our car. You'll notice on the controller this little extra pigtail wire. This wire isn't needed for this installation. This wire is an extra power source, so if in the case of a police car, if you use the police flasher mode and you want to put a light bar on the top, this is the cable that you can use to power your light bar. Or in the case of your off-road truck, if you have a light bar, this is the cable that would power the light bar. We're not going to need it for this installation, so I'm just going to go ahead and peel off the adhesive. This adhesive is pretty strong. This double back foam tape will very securely hold this UF7 to your vehicle. If you're tight on space, these little tabs right here, these are screw tabs. If you ever want to use them, you could also use them for mounting the controller to your chassis. But these are breakaway, so if you're tight on space and you don't need them, you can just wiggle them a few times and they'll break right off. The next step is wiring up or connecting all of our LEDs to the controller, and we're going to quickly refer to the manual on exactly what the configuration should be for headlights, taillights, and turn signals. In looking at the manual, we can see that for headlights, taillights, and turn signals, we want to be set to mode number 5. We will set the mode by pressing a small button right here, and that just scrolls through the 9 modes that the controller has, and we'll get into that in a moment. But this little chart also shows you how to connect the lights for your vehicle. So for the ports labeled E, these are where you'll plug in your headlights. For the port labeled B, this is where your taillights and brake lights will be connected. Your left turn signals for front and rear will plug into port C. There's 2 connectors you'll notice for port C. And your right ones will plug into port F. Port F is right here. Go ahead and plug those in. Again, these are interchangeable. They're both right turn signals, both of the connectors here. Okay, you can see there I have it plugged into port F, and the other 2 will plug into port C. And this is how it looks right now. So on this car, our radio is under this cover. The first thing we're going to need to do is take our Allen wrench and remove the 2 screws that hold the cover in place. In this case, these are 2mm screws, and so I'm using a 2mm socket wrench. Now that we have the cover off, notice the 2 cables. One of these cables goes to our motor controller and the other goes to our steering servo. In this case, the motor controller is this cable and the steering cable is this cable. We're going to unplug each one of these cables and we're going to feed in our Y connector in its place. Do it one at a time and make sure you take note of the orientation of each cable before you pull it out. You have to make sure that the orders stay the same. In order to feed our cables through the same way right here, on this car it's necessary to actually remove these 2 screws so I can lift the radio up and be able to access this little area right here where these cables are coming through. We're going to actually pull these back through and then feed our cable in its place. Okay, now that we have that one out, I'm going to go ahead and feed our cable up through the same slot and the same rubber. Okay, I have our cable fed through. I'm going to make sure I plug it in to the same port and the same orientation as the one that I pulled out. Okay, there it is. Now we have to do the same thing for our motor cable, and we should note right here that the brown wire corresponds to black on this cable. Our cables are only red, white, and black, so just we're going to make a little conversion there. We're going to equate brown to black in this case. Take our other cable, feed it through, and there we have our two cables. Now we have to make a note that the cable coming out of port 1 is the steering cable, and we need to make sure that we plug in our adapter here into the same cable in the same orientation. And if you get it wrong, it won't damage the controller, it just won't work. So we're going to do this, and we're going to keep it loose and test the system out and make sure it's all good before we put it all back together. Alright, and do the same thing with our motor cable. We now have our wires installed. So to recap what we did, we removed the steering cable from channel 1 and the motor cable from channel 2. We paid careful attention to the orientation and the colors. The cable that came out of port 2, which was for the motors, we related the brown cable color to black. So we pulled those cables out, and then we took our Y-splitter cable, which has two types of ends on it. We took the male end of it, fed it through up and into our channel 1 position, and the cable that we took out of channel 1 we then plugged into our Y adapter. The other end is the end that will go into our car, and we'll explain that next. So we did that for each of our cables. You can see here these are the two connections where we tapped the cables out and plugged them into, and these are the two ends that are going to go into our YF7 controller. Note that the US7 has two power connectors. One of them is labeled as connector 1 and the other is connector 2. The Y cable coming from our motor, the one that has the motor cable plugged into it, is going to go into connector 1 and the steering cable into connector 2. When we plug it in, we want to make sure that the black wire is facing that direction with respect to the controller. If you plug it in backwards, it won't damage the controller, it just won't work properly. So let's go ahead and plug this in. And we'll also go ahead and plug in our steering, making sure that our orientation is wrong, and I just plugged that in backwards. Okay, that one is correct. And this one is also plugged in correctly. We'll go ahead and put down a battery into the car and test it out. As we connect the battery, take a look at the controller. Right now there's nothing on. The most likely case for nothing turning on is that the controller is set to mode 0, which is all off. If I go ahead and press this button right here, there's an LED right next to it that will blink. The LED blinked one time and all the lights turned on steady. We're now in mode 1. If I press the button again, you'll notice it'll blink twice. Now we're in mode 2. All lights are on as well in mode 2. Mode 3, it blinks 3 times. This is the strobes for the police car or fire truck. Press it again. This is the same police mode but with the added headlights and taillights. and now it'll blink 5 times and we'll be in mode 5. At this point, if I turn, I now get turn signals, both forward and rear. Let me show you that, and we also should now have a full brake light functionality, so let's check it out. Right now we only have the 2 center LEDs for tail and brake lights. We do have our brake lights, right, left, right, and left. Sometimes you can run into issues at this point of the installation. Your light might be on steady, but your wheels look straight. If you adjust your trim to where your wheels are straight, if the LED doesn't shut off, then that means that you have to go into your car and adjust the settings on the steering servo, so that when the lights are off and the controller is at the 0 position, you have to adjust your car so that the front wheels are straight and it drives straight. That's one of the most common troubleshooting problems that people have once the installation gets to this stage. Now that everything has checked out, I disconnected the battery and I'm ready to go in, put in some zip ties, some zip tie mounts, and clean up the wiring so it doesn't get all tangled in with the rest of your car when you're servicing it. I went ahead and put a zip tie around here, looping around the plastic. That keeps the cables out of the way of the servo and out of the drive belt mechanism. At this point of the installation, as you're putting in your zip ties, you want to make sure your cables have a little bit of slack in them, so if they get moved around, they can move a little bit freely. And I always like to feed one side of the tail lights or headlights, pull them all the way over to one side, and then we'll feed them up kind of from the same direction on both the front and the rear. Here's how my car came out, and on all of the zip ties, once you got them nicely snug on there, you can go ahead and just cut it off with your cutters here. And this is, as I said, the car how we did it. You can spend more time and do a little bit nicer job if you like to. And at this stage, we're ready to apply some zap goo and to put our cover back on our radio area. So let's go ahead and do that first, and then we'll put some zap goo down. We're now ready to apply some zap goo or shoe goo to the LEDs. It's better to be on the generous side when applying the glue to these LEDs. This kind of glue is really quite amazing. It'll hold the LEDs very securely on one hand, but on the other hand, if it ever gets damaged and you want to replace it, the glue can be peeled off. So I'll go ahead and put the glue on here, and then I'll show you a close-up of kind of how you want to do it. Show you about how much to apply. When you're applying the glue, make sure you get some not only on the bezel but on the LED wires. This really helps support the LED, that's so critical. And don't be shy. One last item to note on this US 7 controller. Mode 5 is for turn signals, but if you want to have a mode where you just plug it in and you want to see how it looks with all the LEDs on steady, including both of the rear and the front, modes 1 and 2 will allow you to do that. If I keep scrolling through, you'll see some strobes. You can play with all of these modes if you like. And this is our headlight, taillight turn signals. And here is a random flasher. This one is also pretty cool. So you get all of these modes with the one controller. So you get to decide how you want to play with it. Alright, let's go check it out and see how it looks in some low lighting situations.